Sadashiva Samarambam Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmadacharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam Vishvaro Guratmeti Murti Veda Vibhagine Yamabda Vyapta Dehaya Dakshinamurtaye Namaha Sava Vedanta Sedanta Gocharam Tamagocharam Govindam Paramanantam Satguru Pranatoshmaham Om Shanti 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 Om Namaste. Welcome my and your friends. We are carrying on with our Panchadasi. We are moving into Mananam, okay, and resolving doubts. Yeah, are you on the same page? Resolving doubts. We have seen unconscious discrimination, and then now we begin from we have seen the last verse, 48, verse 48, and now we are moving into the topic of Mananam, which is presenting here as resolving doubts. So we also consider this stage as the stage on which we try to remember what we heard, what we listened, and process it in a way so that we can agree with it. The statements of the Upanishads are generally counterintuitive. They seem to be, excuse me, can you put it in airplane mode, please, Sylvia? They are in general, they sound like contradictory, and we have a hard time to agree with those statements. Therefore, we listen, we have our questions, our doubts, and we can't really agree. We agree with certain things, certain aspects of the Upanishads, of the teaching. We say, oh, this is brilliant, oh, this is very nice. But certain things, I mean, it takes quite some work until we can accept it, you know. And one of them is when the Upanishad says that the limited person we believe ourselves to be is in truth unlimited consciousness. So when we put our sense of limitation, inadequacy, insufficiency, and so on, against the statement that says that in truth we are limitless, fullness, completion, you know, and so on. So it takes some time for us to process this information, and we can only process it in the light of the teachings. We need to go back to the teachings, because if we don't remember the logic as it was presented to us, it remains like a huge contradiction, because that's not the way I feel, that's not the way I experience myself. So and then we need to do what? We need to come to terms with those statements until it is a doubtless acceptance, a doubtless knowledge. It is a doubt-free acceptance of those statements, final statements of the Upanishads, which we can fake it, like Ramji used to say, fake it until you make it. So we can begin by faking it, say, oh yes, I am limitless and infinite conscious being, and so on. So we can fake it, but as we know, anything fake does not really fully satisfy us. So it comes a point that I want the real thing. I want to have this understanding as a fact, not as an idea, concept, or wishful thinking, you know, or process of faking until I make it. So it comes a point that we need to convert this information, this intellectual understanding into what, you know, is said to be a direct and immediate knowledge, right? Doubtless knowledge. So this is usually the Mananam process, which unavoidably implies listing all our suspiciousness, everything that still feels a little bit crazy, a little bit unaccepted, and then I have to clear and clear and clear all those doubts, because those doubts are going to undermine our conviction of self-knowledge. So the self-knowledge has to be full conviction. You know, you have to have such a trust in that knowledge. And if we have unresolved questions that we say, oh yeah, but that's okay. This is not really relevant. And then we push it under the carpet here and there. And then what happens is that oh yes, I know, I understood, and you know, but there is something there that's making my self-knowledge shaky, you know, shaking. So in the first challenge, you know, on the first possible situation in which I'm tested, and then I may shake and I may assume my identity as a limited person. Okay, so that such is the importance of not only contemplating it, but really bringing up to the conscious mind all our questions and suspiciousness, distrust in the teachings, distrust in the teacher. So a lot of people, they have problems with teachers. And I often say to my students, friends in Brazil, so if you have certain trust in the scriptures, but if you don't fully trust the teacher, don't throw the teaching with the teacher. You understand? So look for another teacher, but don't reject the teachings, because it's a big mistake. You understand? So if you have a problem with the teacher is not trustworthy to you, keep the teachings and then look for another teacher. So we need to bring those distrust in the teacher tradition to surface, to the conscious mind, so that we can see them and we can address them and resolve those questions. Therefore, Mananam means removing doubts about what was unfolded, so that the inquirer can reap the benefit of knowledge, which is liberation. So liberation, of course, is to be free from that sense of limitation imposed by Maya, which manifests as avidya, okay? And which manifests as well as psychological suffering. So I am still under the spell of avidya, and I still identify with the body-mind. Therefore, I still look mainly for protection and security for the body-mind, and then I suffer because we can't really control our experience, you know. So as we know, so the end goal here is liberation, and that is the fructification of self-knowledge. The self-knowledge can be a partial self-knowledge, which brings already a certain degree of freedom and satisfaction. But we want it to be a full self-knowledge, so that we don't run into a situation in which we may feel like, oh my God, you know, I lost my self-knowledge. I lost my sense of confidence in my knowledge, you understand? So we need to do this job through and through until we have all doubts removed. And then we can enjoy a sense of freedom because ignorance does not deceive us, as it used to. There are two types of doubts. One is doubts for normal people, and two is doubts for very intellectual people who are entrenched in a materialistic view of reality, meaning the world of duality. In Vidyaranyaka's time, they were called logicians. I don't know how to pronounce that. Logicians. The arguments required to dismiss the doubts of materialistic intellectuals are very subtle. So the arguments have to be subtle because, of course, these objections from these very intellectual, materialistic people are subtle as well. And the average seeker need not be concerned with them because moksha is simply discriminating consciousness from the objects appearing in it. So as we know, the most fundamental tool of Vedanta, everything we do in Vedanta is part of preparing the mind, refining the mind, making the mind subtle and qualified for this final discrimination. And this final discrimination is the discrimination between I, the subject self, and the object. And then it becomes a little bit more tricky when we have to throw the mind and the intellect in the bag of objects as well. And then this discrimination becomes subtle. So here it says, self-knowledge, which is conducive to freedom, is just discriminating consciousness from every object appearing in it. Doubt itself can be treated generically as an object and therefore dismissed as mithya. Okay, so this is a shortcut. Suppose, oh yes, I have quite a few doubts, and then the guru comes to you and says, so you know the doubts? Really? Oh, are you aware of your doubts? Yes, I am aware of my doubts. I have 57 doubts. And then the guru says, okay, I'm not going to go through your 57 doubts because if you see the doubts, it means you are objectifying them. It means they are all objects and you are the light of the illuminator. So don't mix yourself with these subtle objects, the so-called thoughts or doubts. Thoughts relate to not trusting around the topic of not trusting the statements or not understanding sometimes. Sometimes we doubt because we do not understand as well. So it's easier said than done because we say put all your doubts in one bag and see it as objects. But if the individual has come up with so many doubts, it means that he or she did not have a highly qualified mind to discriminate the self from all those objects by which it still is wrapped up with the body-mind sense of identity, therefore resisting certain statements of Vedanta. So in other words, if he could not clear his doubts to the extent of having 57 doubts, it means that his intellect is not that pure, his discrimination is not that great, and to ask the individual to discriminate all those 57 doubts from the self, from consciousness, awareness, is maybe to ask too much from such a person. You understand what I mean? But it's true. We can take a shortcut and try to treat generically all doubts as objects. But in most cases, it does not work. I mean, the shortcuts to go to the very final aspects of the teachings and say, okay, I don't have time to talk to, I just go to the fine teaching. I'm going to discriminate consciousness from the intellect or from the gunas or from all jiva's experience, you know. So discrimination is something that has to be grown, you know, built, you know, gradually become subtler and subtler and subtler, grounded in understanding about phenomenal objects and myself as the seer, the true seer. It has to be gradually growing. If we turn to the person and say, okay, just discriminate with you from anything that you experience, the person, oh yes, that's very simple, you know, but maybe it does not work in most cases because discrimination was not developed to the point. Usually we get to understand the truth, you know, by one of those simple discriminations, but that comes more after the development of a very fine and subtle intellect, you know, which requires discrimination between many other things. So I often say that discrimination, Viveka, has to begin with discriminating Dharma from Adharma. We are all the time using this discriminating faculty, and we begin discriminating denser objects from the self. Now we need to discriminate that I am not this physical body to begin with, you know, before we can discriminate I consciousness from the intellect on which I shine, right? You agree, Mark? However, it's true that duality is an entrenched fact and in the thinking of everyone, and because ignorance is very intelligent, it can create clever arguments to dismiss the idea that the self and the object are non-separate. Okay, when we say that the nature of reality is non-duality, and then we say that, and this reality is one without a second, is non-dual. And then we have a problem. They say, oh, but we experience objects. And then we have to come and say, yes, but the objects are not separate from the object, from the subject. You know, so understanding that the objects exist, but the only reality is consciousness. And if we experience the object, we experience the object just superimposed on consciousness, which is the only reality. So it's difficult for the person, for the average person, especially beginners, accept that. Therefore, they are going to create very clever arguments to refuse the idea that objects exist within, you know, the realm, within the scope of awareness, consciousness, and not apart from. And how so? As a projection, an unreal, apparent projection. We have all those analogies or metaphors, you know, like a mirage. Now we have a projection, exists, we experience, but the only reality is what? The only reality is the sand. Oh, but the water looks like wet. There is no contradiction between the wetness of the water that you are seeing and the dryness of the sand. But how so? Because the water is not real. You understand? The water is not real. The dryness of the sand is the only reality. So what is not real can be superimposed on consciousness. And in fact, any superimposition requires consciousness, awareness. And it does not affect awareness and existing within awareness, not apart from awareness. And it takes some time for anyone coming to Vedanta to accept those arguments. And then someone very sophisticated in arguing and intelligent are going to bring forth a lot of, sophisticated argument. This is very interesting reading, in any case, because they reveal the tremendous sophistication of Vedanta as a means of self-knowledge. I have lumped them all together because they constitute the same argument. I have omitted an extremely technical portion of these arguments explaining the problems of logic based on the materialistic view of reality. The logical approach to non-duality is very useful, but it breaks down when we come to an analysis of the cause of the universe, okay? So let's see if we understand this statement here that it's pretty much from Ramji. The logical approach to non-duality, we want to understand that the nature of reality is non-duality. And the logical approach is useful. What is the logical approach? The logical approach is cause and effect, cause and effect, cause and effect. So science is all based on cause and effect, cause and effect. So things have its source. Huh? And they keep going. Science, modern science, has difficulty in understanding the origin of the universe as an example. So it breaks down this linear cause and effect logic, analysis, what brings about this, what brings about that, and then that brings about that, and a conjunction of different causes bring about a cluster of effects and so on. So it becomes complicated. And all this logical approach try to understand the origin of the universe, it breaks down when we come to an analysis of the cause of the universe. As we know, to try to understand the real cause of the universe is the most subtle of all subjects of Vedanta, of the Upanishads, because it is incomprehensible from the standpoint of the intellect. So it's not intellectually understandable what has motivated Maya, or how it came from consciousness, how this universe was manifested and created. And if we want to look for this linear way of logical analysis, we are going to come to a dead end, because to begin with, there is no absolute cause and there is no absolute effect. So it means to say there is no really any cause for creation, you understand? Because the universe, the cosmos, creation was never really created, okay? It's not a linear thing that began on a day number 1 or 0, It's just a cyclical phenomenon. Creation is not like linear, it's a cyclical, and we can look into it by understanding that we will never find a real answer if we have philosophical discussions to define what came first, if it was the seed or the tree. So the seed and the tree, the egg and the chicken, makes it clear to us that somehow creation on every level is cyclical, okay? So what appears to be a cause becomes an effect from a different perspective. So all of that is going to make modern science a little bit in trouble, and they have difficulty in understanding the origin of the universe. It reasons to the point where it understands that there must be a moment when the creation began, but it cannot tell you what happened at the point of creation or before, because non-duality, singularity, is a state where there are no information available from which to reason. So the science will never really get to understand the most obvious reality, the only reality which is the most obvious factor in every investigation. You know? So they are investigated, they want to come to the point of understanding the source, yeah, and the cause of the universe, of creation. Yeah? And then they keep going back and back and back and back and back. And then even if they come to understand, okay, I mean, it's about here, it's about this point that universe begin its formation. And then they have to find an argument, a logical base on which they can say, okay, it was coming from something else, and what is this something else? Okay, what was there before the creation of the cosmos? And on which base we want to say that there was a day on which the cosmos began existing? So how can we conceive the beginning of existence of the cosmos without defining what was there before the beginning of existence of the cosmos? So if the cosmos began existing up to from a certain point, it means to say that before that point there was non-existence. No? So how can there be non-existence if in order to find out the non-existence of the universe, we need to exist, you know, so that we can know that there is no existence of consciousness or of the universe. So consciousness is always the background. You understand? The background, the phenomena projected by Maya, we can trace back and go to a point in which it seems like, okay, maybe the cosmos began billions of years ago, and that's how it seems, and it's going to disappear. And that we can see. So, but yet all of that is happening within consciousness. And consciousness does not depend on matter. It's not part, product, or property of the universe. Consciousness is there in the presence of the universe, and in its absence, consciousness is just shining on its own as existence without any superimposition. So science will never get there. They don't include the consciousness reflecting or shining in the very, very intellect of the investigator doing all those research. They just neglect, they overlook that. So it reasons to a point where it understands that there must be a moment when the creation began, but it cannot tell what was there, what happened at that moment, how it came about. Oh, it was just boom, yeah. It was just a huge Big Bang. So, but they cannot understand how this Big Bang began and what was there before the Big Bang and so on. There is no information from that condition. When there is consciousness without any phenomenon appearing, so superimposed on it, we are in a condition in which there is no information available in that condition. Before Maya comes and starts coloring consciousness with its attributes, there is nothing, there is no information available in that condition. So how can we find out something if there is no attributes of Maya producing, you know, some information for us, from hints for us, you know? There is no Maya. If there are no Maya, there is nothing that can be known, you know, informatively. Vedanta pramana is not perception-based because consciousness is not an object of perception. This is why we don't argue with anyone who does not accept the Vedas as a means of knowledge for knowing the self. So this is an important statement. So Vedanta is a means, pramana is a means. And this means is not based on perception, and it's not based on inference. Although the teaching methodology use data from perception and inference, but self-knowledge, which is the goal of Vedanta, is not really a byproduct of perception and inference. Okay, why? Because perception and inference is based on perception and inference. They are pramanas for gaining knowledge of objects. Okay, so since consciousness is not an object, it cannot be known by perception and inference, although perception and inference is very, very important tool for analyzing our experience, and coming to those conclusions in the light of the teachings, okay? But this final self-knowledge is not gained by perception and inference. This is why we do not argue with these intellectuals, these materialistic intellectuals, who does not accept the Vedas as a means of knowledge for the self. So these materialist people, to begin with, they believe that there is no such a thing as the self. No, they believe in matter, and they believe in mind, in thought. They believe in thought. They believe in mind, and they believe that the ultimate truth is a superpower of mind. Of the more info, the more data you accumulate, boom, 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 and then I'm enlightened. They literally call enlightenment somebody who has a lot of knowledge, okay, in terms of philosophical knowledge and scientific knowledge, all kinds of knowledge. The more data you have, more information, you have more narrow connections, and you're a genius, you're an Einstein, but yet you don't know your true nature. You don't know your mortal nature. So they see the mind as the ultimate truth. And if you tell them that there is something illuminating the mind, and they say, "You crazy, you believe in those things, on those esoteric, mystical things, talking about, they can conceive energies, because nowadays energy is something that almost every scientist can be in peace with, but something which is not energy, which is not thought, which is not the mind, but it's something that, concedes sentience to the mind. So they can't see. So it's useless to talk to them, discuss with them, because they don't accept the Vedas as the pramana. You understand? They don't accept the Vedas as the pramana to know the true nature of the knower, which is not an object of knowledge. So you're going to know through a pramana, because every knowledge requires a pramana, but this pramana is not based on perception and inference, yet you need a pramana, or you don't need. If you have had pramanas in your previous births, let's say, and then you come and you listen, and then you remember, and the knowledge is firm. Understand? But otherwise, we need a pramana, and this pramana reveals the self in a very unique way, because it's not going to reveal the self as, okay, therefore now here it is, the self is here. No, it's going to come to a conclusion by eliminating, canceling, destroying all wrong notions in regards to what we are. My I thought, what is this I? What is my real identity? It's going to deconstruct all the notions, erroneous notions we have about what this I is. And then in the end, and he's going to say, there you are, instead of this, here it is, he said, there you are. You are that Brahman, you are that self. Okay, so after have destroyed all wrong notions, of course, we only argue with open-minded people who has a certain degree of respect, let's say, to the Vedas and to the Upanishads. We cannot expect people to really trust the Upanishads and Vedanta in the beginning, because unless somebody is highly qualified, but at least people have to have a certain open mind, attitude, okay? Because the meaning of their statements is not always obvious, only owing to the fact that although reality is non-dual, it's experienced as duality. So we experience duality, reality is non-dual, but we cannot cancel duality. Oh no, you can cancel duality. So the way to go is samadhi, we call it samadhi. No, I mean, if you really want to find reality, you want to find something that is always present, not something which is a state that come and go. You know, I mean, something that is fickle like that cannot be real. No, it exists now, it does not exist next moment, that state. So the only way, the meaning of this statement, reality is non-dual, is difficult because everyone experiences duality as reality. Vedanta does not require blind faith either. It requires a certain shraddha, trust, and trust pending the results of your inquiry. You're going to give yourself some time. You're going to follow the logic and see what it does. And meanwhile, the intellect is going to develop more sattva, getting more focused, more sharp, more clear. And then you're going to develop more and more trust that maybe these scriptures really point me to the right direction, you know, and then this shraddha is going to grow, and then we begin making peace with the notion that the nature of reality is non-dual. Yeah? Although we experience duality, myself and that, this, you, she, and so on. And it's a very simple understanding for us at this point. So the reason we experience duality is because we have assumed the self to be the body. So the moment that I assume the self to be the body, immediately there it goes, boom, duality. Because there are many bodies and many other objects besides the human bodies. So I have time, space, you know, and plurality of phenomenal objects, you know, happening in my mind. So the only way we can make peace with this statement is to understand Satya and Mithya. I mean, Satya is the only reality, is non-dual, and then Mithya, this reality, which is not real, which is just projection. So this is when I consciousness appear as a jiva, and the jiva is somehow associated to the physical body by which it becomes an experience knowing entity, and then we experience duality. But you can experience duality keeping your perspective of self-knowledge that everything is happening in you. So in me, yes, in you. How so? Because I am consciousness. I'm not the body-mind. I am consciousness, and the body, mind, and all other objects experienced through this body-mind construct is happening in me. Yeah? So you cannot cancel duality, but you can see duality as the superimposition. Why? Because you have shifted your sense of identity from the body-mind to the consciousness that enlivens and vivifies and makes this body-mind dynamically interacting with other objects. Therefore, we only argue with open-minded people with a certain degree of trust. Duality seems to be real in the beginning until Vedanta does your magic. It's magic. Vedanta does not require blind faith. only a commitment to keeping the mind open to the teaching and the willingness to discriminate until the self is isolated from the sheets. So we keep doing this work, understanding that there is a consciousness and there is a mind, an intellect. There are the three bodies on which the mind shines to become a sentient being. So I'm not the body, I'm not the mind, I'm not this sentience, I am the original consciousness, and I'm going to have to a point of being able to discriminate this original self from the five sheets, meaning to say this original self from the intellect, from the mind, from the ego, from the pranas, from the physical body, and from the causal body. So that's what it takes. So we have to come to understand that none of this experience defines me as free, limitless consciousness, okay? These experiences are going to define the body-mind construct. And now we have a doubt if the self has attributes, it is unreal. So in the context of what we have said, that the nature of reality is non-dual and the self has no attributes, and the doubter says, if the self has attributes, I have understood, it's not real, okay? So the self has no attributes. If there is any qualities or properties to the self, and then it's not real, and I have understood that the self is real because the self is the source, is the heart of everything, is the base, is the substrate, is the only reality. So if the self has no attributes, it's then has to be classified as unreal. And you have said that the self has no attributes. Then, secondly, something without attributes cannot be known, perceived, or even conceived. How can you conceive something without attribute? We know that it's not an object of perception, inference, and it's not an object of knowledge, and it's not an object of conceptualization. We cannot conceptualize the self, because you can conceptualize something if it has some certain characteristics. Yeah, you have to conceptualize something, and then, oh, how is it? Oh, it's like, no, you cannot do that with the self. No? So the doubter is saying, like, something without attributes cannot even be conceived. How can you know this attributeless self? Yeah? The text refutes the notion that the self cannot be taught. So a lot of people in the spiritual world believe that the self cannot be taught because it's none of anything. It's not this, not that. It's nothing. It's not defined by any qualification or qualities or anything. Therefore, you cannot teach it. And it makes sense, this argument. Huh? How can you teach something that cannot be conceptualized? In fact, most of the teachings of Vedanta do not really teach the self. Huh? It teaches what? The not self. Huh? So the teaching of Vedanta is aiming to the not self because consciousness got confused with the not self, which is, the objects superimposed. I mean, it's very easy to see this using the analogy of the screen and the image on the cinema hall, okay? So we have the screen there, and then we have the projections, and they are very dynamic, and they make nice stories. So the screen is there, it's clear, but now it is affected by this projection. And it's going to be take it some work, to understand that all of these are projections, but they are not real. There is a moment that they turn off the projector and the only reality is the screen. Huh? So how are we going to teach the self directly except by saying, no, it's none of these projections. It's none of these name, colors, and forms, which are superimposition, which are objects that are thrown on the screen of consciousness. So you cannot say consciousness is this and that because it is a screen without any attribute, without any image. No? So, and then we have to discriminate or reveal the self by rejecting, they're not self, all these superimpositions. The Vedanta is very simple, as we know. We just go, it's none of these things. And it is one of the nicest pointer that I like within this Panchadasi is that it's none of these things that appear in you because you are the light of the illuminator. So the illuminator, that which illumines, reveals. So we know because the self is the real, the truthful illuminator. You understand? It illumines through the mind, through the intellect, and makes itself to know those apparent phenomena in this apparent order of reality. So I am the light that illumines and reveals the world in this mithya reality, this apparent reality. So the light of the illuminator can only be known by what? By discriminate or reject reality to these associations between the light of the illuminators and the objects it reveals. And then it got attached to the object and somehow we got confused and we don't understand that we are the pure light that illumines and reveals. So we go about understanding what is the not self. They refuse the idea that the self cannot be taught. They say that the self cannot be taught. These texts refuse this notion, and this notion that the self cannot be taught is a favorite argument of the experiential crowd in the spiritual world. They say that if reality is non-dual awareness, there is no need for a teaching. Okay, if consciousness is non-dual, and if there is nothing else but consciousness, and then you don't need what? You don't need a teacher, you don't need a teaching, you don't need a student, because the teacher, the teaching, the student, they are not real, right? The teachings of Vedanta are not real, the teacher is not real, and the student is not real, so therefore none of this is useful. Some people go around saying that, oh, the true Vedanta is that nothing exists and you don't need a teaching, you don't need a teacher. Okay, so now what? Oh, here it goes. You have your enlightenment certificate. You got it. Okay, so you don't exist, and the teacher do not exist, and the teaching is also unreal. So did you get it, Karen? So now we are done. We don't need to look into Vedanta anymore, okay? Because all of this is mithya, and it's a fact. The teacher, the teaching, and the student, they are all mithya. But it is in mithya that satya can be apprehended and understood. Because in satya, there is no question of knowledge and ignorance. Consciousness is beyond knowledge and ignorance. Ignorance is a phenomenon in mithya that occurs in the human intellect, and the human intellect suffers because of this misapprehension in respect to its true nature, identity. So it has to go through the process of mithya, having a means of knowledge, a teacher and a student. So there is no need for a teacher. He's a real bad idea is one of those most terrible shortcuts, because in the very end you can say, okay, so forget it, you are that ultimate reality, and none of this is real. And then there is a popular rendition of this idea is that he who knows does not speak, and he who speaks does not know. And the people that like to believe that the self is emptiness or silence or samadhi or no thoughts, the mind is the problem and so on, that thinking is your enemy and so on. So they say like, oh, forget it, these people who blah, 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 Vedanta, the people who really know, they are just like Ramana Maharaj. They look for a cave and they sit in silence. Those are the people who know. No, the people who know and the people who understand that there is a means, there is a pramana that can facilitate others also to know, they are going to be compelled to say something, if they are assigned by Ishvara to do so. Okay? So it is by saying, by conveying this analysis of experience, that we can undo this confusion between I consciousness and the intellect on which I shine, producing many experience. The following verse, 49 to 52. Here is an argument. You say that the self is revealed by a guru through the statements of the Upanishad. The guru is the subject of the revelation. The teaching is the instrument of the revelation, and the self is the object of the revelation. This means that the self is only one of three factors. This means that the self is only one of three factors involved in the production of knowledge, because we have subdivided the guru, the pramana, and the self. So every time there is a teacher teaching something, the object of knowledge is the goal. And the means of knowledge, the teaching methodology is the pramana. So you cannot teach physics to someone if you get a pramana of chemistry, because the pramana of chemistry is going to produce knowledge of chemistry. So likewise, we need to get a proper pramana. So we have the object of knowledge with consciousness, and we need a proper pramana. And where I am, the guru, this means that the self is only one of these three factors, because we say the self is object of knowledge, and not to say that the knowledge self is being put as an object. The self is only one because here we have the guru and the pramana, okay? So in order to produce this knowledge, this self is only one of these three factors. All three of these factors are thoughts. The self is a thought, the means of knowledge is thought, and the teacher is also thought. So if you say that the self is revealed, is the revealed object, it means that it's just a thought. Thoughts are in the field of duality. They are only apparently real, but the self is non-dual. It's Satyam, what is real. So what is the use of realizing an apparent self? Okay, so he says Satya is the only reality, it's non-dual, and now we are talking of three factors, not two, but three factors. The guru, the means of knowledge, and the object of knowledge. What is this? If the self is non-dual, how he gets involved with two other factors, and we know that all these factors are basically thoughts, and thoughts are meteor. So if that is so, so what is the use of realizing this apparent self, a self that appears to be a thought, an object of knowledge? To avoid this problem, you should say that it is without division. And then to avoid this problem, you say that the self is without division. You don't say that the self is non-dual, but you say that it's without division. It's a suggestion of Vidyaranya. To avoid this problem, you say that it is without division, nirvikalpa. In this way, you get it out of duality, mithya. Okay, it says no. It's just the self is nirvikalpa. There are no thoughts. There are no divisions. Okay, and duality, and it becomes non-dual. But if Brahman is nirvikalpa, it will not be an object of revelation, so it will not be revealed by Vedanta, because the moment, now it's still the inquirer, yeah, present his argument. But if Brahman is nirvikalpa, it's free of thoughts, and it's free of divisions, there is no G's and a thought, it will not be an object of revelation, because without thoughts, nothing can be revealed. Okay, so there is nothing that can. You need thoughts. I mean, later on in this text, we're going to understand that for knowledge to take place, you need to have a thought. You have the I thought, and then you have a thought of an object, and then we have a possibility to do knowledge. Knowledge cannot happen without thought. Okay. So here, if Brahman is nirvikalpa, it will not be an object of revelation. So it will not be revealed by Vedanta, because the moment it is revealed, it becomes an object, and therefore it is useless for moksha, because objects are not real. You cannot teach the self, was the final conclusion of the object. And then Vidyaranya say, is the self dual or non-dual? Does consciousness have properties? Does consciousness have properties, saguna, or it is nirguna? So Vidyaranya answered with a question, but shows the doubter that logical arguments do not prove the non-existence of non-dual awareness, because without awareness, they cannot be conceived. So, very interesting. Vidyaranya does not answer his question. He say, the answer of Vidyaranya is, is the self non-dual, dual or non-dual? It is saguna or nirguna. Okay, he's trying to help the guy to process, to think. So it's non-dual, okay, without division, nothing other than itself, and there are no thoughts, okay, no qualities, no properties. So Vidyaranya does not answer the question, but shows the doubter that logical arguments do not prove the non-existence of non-dual awareness. How can you prove the non-existence of consciousness? Because without consciousness, this argument cannot be conceived, okay? So logical arguments do not prove the non-existence of non-dual awareness, because without this non-dual awareness, okay, these logical arguments do not stand. They cannot be conceived. All arguments existing within the scope of this conscious awareness that somehow illumines these arguments, these vritis, these thoughts, as objects that are being revealed from consciousness. There is nothing that can be revealed without consciousness. Without consciousness, any argument is impossible. Okay? So that's what Vidyaranya wants to show to him. Logical arguments are not going to prove that consciousness is not a reality, always present. Why? Because without consciousness, you cannot have logical arguments. Logical arguments, it's a proof of consciousness. You understand? Very simple. Vidyarana, if you want to know if the self is with thoughts, savikalpa, or without thoughts, nirvikalpa, it shows that you are treating the vision as an attribute of the self. Okay, there is a little bit more of heavy duty stuff here. We leave it for next week. We have crossed our line, and we are open to have a question if anybody has anything to say. It's very simple. I mean, sometimes Vedanta presents itself with complex thoughts or analysis or reasons, reasonings, But fundamentally, it's very, very, very simple. Consciousness is that which is always present in any experience, in any argument, in any discussion. And the very discussion may be about the existence or non-existence of consciousness. And the consciousness there conceiving existence, consciousness to that discussion, without which, without consciousness, it would be impossible. So as you can see, it's very, very simple. This light is all shining, and everything that comes within it, it can be just philosophical discussion. It can be seen as a proof of the light of the illuminator. Okay, it is that simple. Don't you think, Claudio?
Absolutely, yes. Yes, it's the only thing. I am really understand it. With the last sentence, it was very, very clear. Even if the argument, it seems very difficult at time, but at the end is only consciousness, no?
Yeah, we can go through all these exercises. That's why Ranji cuts off a lot of these things, because it may be good. It does some good because it sharpens the mind to go through these fine arguments, logical arguments. But none of these arguments are going to prove the non-existence of consciousness as the only invariable factor, therefore the only reality, which is beyond the mind, of course. Okay. Hi, Karen. All is good? Okay.
Processing it all.
Good. Lynn, have you heard from Elizabeth today?
No, I have not.
Yeah. Okay. How are you doing?
As ever. Pretty much always the same here.
Wonderful. Okay. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Thank you, Lord. Thank you, my friends. See you next time. Namaste. Love you. Arrivederci.
Thank you.
Thanks, Avinda. Bye now.
Bye-bye.